Marcus Thompson was not a good man. He was 28 years old and worked building houses in Manchester, England. Marcus was tall and strong. He was 6 feet and 2 inches tall. His arms were big with muscles from years of heavy work. He had many tattoos on his arms and chest. People were scared of him, and Marcus liked it that way. Every day after work, Marcus went to the same pub called the Red Lion. It was a small, dark place with old wooden tables and chairs. The smell of beer and cigarettes filled the air. Marcus sat at the same table every night with his friends. They were all construction workers too, but they were not as big or mean as Marcus. Marcus had 3 friends who always sat with him. There was Tony, a short man with a round belly who laughed at everything Marcus said. There was Dave, a thin man who was always nervous and looked around the room like he was scared. And there was Pete, who was almost as big as Marcus, but not as brave. These 3 men followed Marcus everywhere he went. When Marcus walked into the pub, other people would look down at their drinks. They did not want to make eye contact with him. Marcus loved this power he had over people. He would walk slowly to his table, making noise with his heavy boots on the wooden floor. He wanted everyone to know he was there. Marcus had been a bully since he was a child. In school, he took lunch money from smaller kids. He pushed them around and made them cry. The teachers tried to stop him, but Marcus was too clever. He only bullied kids when adults were not watching. As he got older, Marcus got bigger and stronger. The bullying got worse. Now as an adult, Marcus bullied people in different ways. If someone parked in his favorite spot, he would scratch their car with his keys. If someone looked at him wrong in the pub, Marcus would start a fight. He never picked fights with people who could fight back. Marcus only chose weak targets. At work, Marcus was the boss of his construction crew. The other workers were afraid to say no to him. If someone made a mistake, Marcus would scream at them in front of everyone. He made people work extra hours without pay. If they complained, Marcus would threaten to get them fired. Marcus had a girlfriend named Sarah. She was a pretty woman who worked at a hair salon. Sarah was scared of Marcus too. But she stayed with him because she thought he would protect her. What she did not know was that Marcus was the person she needed protection from. He would get angry at her for small things. He would shout and break things in their apartment. Sarah always apologized, even when it was not her fault. The people in Marcus's neighborhood knew to stay away from him. If kids played too loudly near his apartment, Marcus would come outside and yell at them. Parents would quickly take their children inside. Old people would cross the street when they saw Marcus coming. Shop owners would watch him carefully when he came into their stores. Marcus had a reputation for being the toughest man in his area. People told stories about the fights he had won. They talked about how he had beaten up 3 men at once outside a nightclub. They said he had knocked out a man with just 1 punch. These stories made Marcus feel proud and powerful. But the truth was different from the stories. Marcus had never fought anyone who could really fight back. The 3 men outside the nightclub were drunk and could barely stand up. The man he knocked out with 1 punch was an old man who was just trying to get home from work. Marcus chose his victims carefully. He was a coward who only acted brave when he knew he would win. Every evening at the pub, Marcus and his friends would drink beer and tell stories. Marcus would talk about his day at work and how he had made his workers do what he wanted. Tony would laugh and say Marcus was the strongest man in Manchester. Dave would nod and agree with everything Marcus said. Pete would buy another round of drinks to keep Marcus happy. As the night went on and Marcus drank more beer, he would get louder and meaner. He would point at other people in the pub and make fun of them. He would call them names and laugh. His friends would laugh too, even though they felt bad for the people Marcus was hurting. Sometimes Marcus would start trouble with strangers. He would bump into someone on purpose and then act like it was their fault. He would stare at people until they felt uncomfortable and left. He would make comments about what people were wearing or how they looked. The pub owner knew Marcus caused problems, but he was too scared to ban him from the pub. Marcus thought he was smart and tough. He believed that being big and mean made him better than other people. He did not understand that real strength comes from being kind and helping others. Marcus had never learned this lesson because no one had ever stood up to him. People in the neighborhood had tried to complain about Marcus to the police. But Marcus was careful not to break the law in ways that could be proven. He would threaten people with his words, not his fists. He would damage property when no one was looking. The police could not arrest him without proof. As time passed, Marcus became more confident in his power over others. He thought he could do whatever he wanted to anyone he wanted. He believed that his size and strength made him untouchable. Marcus had never met anyone who was not afraid of him. This confidence would soon become Marcus's biggest problem. He was about to learn that there are people in the world who are much stronger and braver than he could ever imagine. These people wear uniforms and serve their country. They are trained to fight real enemies, not innocent victims. But on this particular evening at the Red Lion pub, Marcus did not know what was coming. He sat with his friends, drinking beer and planning his next day of making other people miserable. He had no idea that tomorrow would be the day his life would change forever. Tomorrow, Marcus would meet someone who would teach him what real strength looked like. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a headache. He had drunk too much beer the night before at the Red Lion pub. His apartment was messy and dirty. Empty beer bottles sat on the table. Pizza boxes were stacked in the corner. Sarah had already left for work at the hair salon. She did not say goodbye to Marcus anymore because he was always mean to her in the mornings. Marcus looked at his phone and saw a text message from Tony. It said, "Want to go to London today? Dave found cheap train tickets online." Marcus smiled. He liked the idea of going to London. He could cause trouble in a new place where people did not know him yet. Marcus called Tony back. "Yeah, let's go to London. Tell Dave and Pete to meet us at the train station at 10 o'clock, he said. Marcus did not ask what they would do in London. He just wanted to go somewhere and have fun. For Marcus, having fun meant making other people feel bad. Marcus took a shower and put on his favorite clothes. He wore black jeans and a tight black t-shirt that showed off his big muscles. He put on his heavy boots that made loud noises when he walked. He looked at himself in the mirror and liked what he saw. Marcus thought he looked tough and scary. Before leaving his apartment, Marcus drank 2 cans of beer. He told himself it was to help with his headache, but really, Marcus just liked drinking. The alcohol made him feel braver and meaner. He put 2 more cans of beer in his backpack for the train ride. At the train station, Marcus met his 3 friends. Tony was excited and talked fast about all the things they could see in London. Dave looked nervous like always, but he had bought the train tickets with his credit card. Pete carried a backpack full of beer cans for everyone to share. The train to London was crowded with people going to work and tourists going sightseeing. Marcus and his friends found 4 seats together. As soon as the train started moving, they opened their beers. Other passengers looked at them with disapproval. It was only 10:30 in the morning and they were already drinking alcohol. Marcus did not care what other people thought. He drank his beer and talked loudly about how weak London people were. "City people are soft," he said. "They sit in offices all day and drink fancy coffee. They would not last one day doing real work like us." Tony laughed and agreed. "Yeah, Marcus. You could beat up any of these London guys with one hand tied behind your back." Dave nodded but looked uncomfortable. He could see other passengers staring at them. Pete just drank his beer and tried not to make eye contact with anyone. As the train got closer to London, Marcus drank more beer and got louder. He pointed at other passengers and made comments about them. He said a businessman in a suit looked like a scared rabbit. He said an old woman reading a book was ugly. His friends laughed nervously, but they were starting to feel embarrassed. When the train arrived in London, Marcus and his friends stumbled off onto the platform. They had each drunk 3 beers during the 2-hour trip. Marcus felt confident and ready to show London who was boss. He walked through the crowded station, bumping into people on purpose and not saying sorry. Outside the train station, London was busy and loud. Cars honked their horns. Buses drove by with advertisements on the sides. People walked quickly in all directions. Marcus had never seen so many people in one place. In Manchester, he knew most of the people in his neighborhood. Here, everyone was a stranger. Tony pulled out his phone and looked at a map. "Where should we go first?" he asked. Dave suggested they visit some museums. Pete wanted to find a pub, but Marcus had a different idea. He had seen something in a movie once that gave him an idea. "Let's go see the Queen's Palace," Marcus said with a mean smile. "I want to see those guards with the funny hats. I bet they're just for show. Probably can't even fight." His friends looked at each other. They could tell Marcus was planning something, and it would probably get them in trouble. They took the underground train to the center of London. The train was packed with people. Marcus stood too close to other passengers and stared at them until they moved away. A young woman with a baby carriage got on the train. Marcus did not offer her his seat. Instead, he made comments about how the baby was too loud. When they got off the underground train, they were near Buckingham Palace. Marcus could see the tall gates and the guards in red uniforms. He had never seen anything like it before. The palace was huge and beautiful. There were gardens with perfect green grass and colorful flowers. Tourists from all over the world were taking pictures, but Marcus was not interested in the beauty of the palace. He was only interested in the guards. He could see them standing perfectly still in their red uniforms and tall black hats. They held rifles and looked straight ahead. They did not move or talk or even blink. "Look at those clowns," Marcus said loudly. "They think they're so important in their fancy costumes. I bet they're not even real soldiers. Probably just actors hired to look pretty for the tourists." Several tourists turned to look at Marcus with shocked faces. They could not believe someone would be so disrespectful. Tony tried to calm Marcus down. "Come on, Marcus. Let's just take some pictures and find a pub." But Marcus was not interested in taking pictures. He was interested in causing trouble. The beer in his system made him feel bold and stupid. Marcus walked closer to the palace gates. There were barriers to keep tourists away from the guards, but Marcus could still get close enough to shout at them. He started making jokes about their uniforms and their hats. His voice carried across the crowd of tourists. "Hey, toy soldier," Marcus yelled at one of the guards. "Can you even see out from under that silly hat?" The guard did not move or respond. This made Marcus think the guard was weak and scared. Marcus did not understand that the guards were trained to ignore distractions and insults. Dave pulled on Marcus's arm. "Let's go, Marcus." People are staring at us, but Marcus pushed Dave away. He was enjoying the attention. A crowd of tourists had formed around them, watching to see what would happen next. Marcus took another beer from his backpack and opened it. He drank it slowly while staring at the guards. The alcohol made him feel invincible. He had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. He was about to learn that some people should never be messed with, no matter how big and tough you think you are. Sergeant James Mitchell had been standing at his post for 2 hours. He was 34 years old and had been a Queen's Guard for 12 years. Before that, he had served in the British Army in Afghanistan and Iraq. James had seen real war and real danger. He had fought against enemies who wanted to kill him and his fellow soldiers. Standing still for hours was not hard for James. He had been trained to do this since he first joined the Queen's Guard. His red uniform was perfect. Every button was polished. His tall black hat sat exactly right on his head. His rifle was clean and ready, even though it was not loaded with bullets during ceremonial duties. James could hear the loud man shouting insults, but he did not move. He had heard worse things than this before. Drunk tourists often came to the palace and said stupid things. James knew that his job was to protect the royal family and the palace. He also knew that part of his job was to ignore people who just wanted attention. The Queen's Guards were famous around the world for standing perfectly still. People came from every country to see them. Most tourists were respectful and just wanted to take pictures. But some people, especially when they had been drinking, thought it was funny to try to make the guards move or react. James had been trained to handle all kinds of situations. He knew when to ignore someone and when to take action. He could tell the difference between a harmless drunk tourist and a real threat. Right now, the big man with tattoos seemed like just another drunk tourist who would get bored and go away. But James was also trained to watch everything around him. He could see the man's friends trying to pull him away. He could see the crowd of tourists watching and taking pictures with their phones. He could see palace security guards moving closer to his position. James was ready for anything that might happen. The loud man was getting closer to the barriers that separated tourists from the guards. James could smell the alcohol on his breath from several feet away. The man's face was red and his eyes were bloodshot. James had seen many drunk people in his years as a guard, but this one seemed more aggressive than most. James thought about his training. He remembered what his sergeant had told him when he first became a Queen's Guard. You represent the crown and the country. You stand for honor and discipline. No matter what anyone says or does, you maintain your dignity and your position. But if someone attacks you, you defend yourself and your post. The drunk man was now shouting directly at James. What's wrong with you? Are you deaf? I'm talking to you. The man's friends were pulling harder on his arms, but he was bigger and stronger than them. Other tourists were starting to move away from the area. Parents were pulling their children to a safe distance. James could see that palace security was getting ready to step in. They had radios and were talking to each other. James knew that if this situation got worse, security would remove the drunk man and his friends from the palace grounds, but James hoped it would not come to that. He preferred to handle situations quietly. The man was now making fun of James's uniform and hat. "Look at this toy soldier. He thinks he's so important. I bet he's never been in a real fight in his life." The man's friends were getting more embarrassed. They could see that other tourists were staring at them with disgust. What the drunk man did not know was that James had been in many real fights. He had fought Taliban fighters in the mountains of Afghanistan. He had been in gun battles where his friends had died. He had earned medals for bravery in combat. James had seen things that would give the drunk man nightmares for the rest of his life. But James did not think about those memories while he stood at his post. He focused on his breathing and staying calm. He thought about his wife and 2 children at home. He thought about the honor of serving his country. He thought about all the tourists who had come to see something beautiful and historic, not to watch a drunk man make a fool of himself. The crowd around them was getting bigger. People were holding up their phones to record what was happening. Some tourists were taking pictures of James, amazed at how still and professional he remained despite the insults. Others were shaking their heads at the drunk man's behavior. James could hear different languages being spoken in the crowd. There were families from America, Germany, Japan, and many other countries. They had all come to London to see the palace and the famous guards. James felt responsible for making sure their visit was memorable for the right reasons. The drunk man was now standing right at the barrier, less than 3 feet away from James. His face was twisted with anger and alcohol. Spit flew from his mouth as he shouted. His friends had almost given up trying to control him. They looked scared and embarrassed. "You think you're better than me?" the man screamed at James. "You're nothing. You're just standing there like a statue. I could knock you down with one punch." The man was swaying slightly as he stood there. The alcohol was making him unsteady on his feet. James remained perfectly still. His eyes looked straight ahead, not at the drunk man. His face showed no emotion. His hands stayed in the correct position on his rifle. To everyone watching, James looked like a statue that had come to life. What the crowd could not see was that James was mentally preparing for what might happen next. He could sense that this situation was different from the usual drunk tourist incident. The man's body language was becoming more aggressive. His fists were clenched. His breathing was getting faster. James had learned to read people during his military service. He could tell when someone was about to do something violent. The drunk man was showing all the signs. James began to shift his weight slightly, getting ready to defend himself if necessary. The man's friends made one last attempt to pull him away. "Come on, Marcus," one of them said. "Let's go find a pub." "This isn't worth it." But Marcus pushed them away harder this time. He was focused completely on James now, and nothing his friends said was going to stop him. Palace security was now moving closer, but they were still several yards away. James knew that if something was going to happen, it would happen before security could intervene. He remained calm and ready, just as he had been trained to do in much more dangerous situations than this. Marcus felt the blood rushing to his head. The beer he had been drinking all morning made everything seem fuzzy and unreal. He stared at the guard who refused to look at him or respond to his insults. In Marcus's drunk mind, this was the ultimate sign of disrespect. No one had ever ignored him like this before. Back in Manchester, when Marcus yelled at someone, they always reacted. They would either fight back, which gave Marcus an excuse to hurt them, or they would back down and apologize, which made Marcus feel powerful. But this guard was doing neither. He was just standing there like Marcus did not exist. "I'm talking to you," Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with rage. Spit flew from his mouth as he shouted. His face was now completely red, and the veins in his neck were bulging. The tourists around him took more steps backward. Even his friends were now standing several feet away. Tony made one more attempt to stop his friend. "Marcus, please. Let's just go. This is getting crazy." But Marcus could not hear anything except the sound of his own anger. The alcohol had taken away his ability to think clearly. All he could feel was rage at this guard who dared to ignore him. Marcus looked around at all the people watching him. He saw phones pointed in his direction, recording everything. In his twisted mind, he thought these people were waiting to see him prove how tough he was. He did not realize they were documenting his stupidity. The guard continued to stand perfectly still. His eyes looked straight ahead, never moving to look at Marcus. His hands remained in the proper position on his rifle. His breathing was steady and calm. To Marcus, this calmness looked like weakness and fear. Marcus had never met anyone like Sergeant James Mitchell before. In Marcus's world, people were either bullies like him or victims who could be pushed around. He had no experience with trained soldiers who had real discipline and real strength. Marcus thought that silence meant fear. The beer in Marcus's system was making him feel like he could do anything. He had forgotten where he was and who he was dealing with. In his drunk mind, this was just another person he could intimidate and control. He had no idea that he was about to attack a man who had been trained to fight and kill enemy soldiers. Palace security was moving closer, but they were still too far away to stop what was about to happen. They could see that the situation was getting dangerous, but they had to move carefully through the crowd of tourists. Their radios crackled as they called for backup. Other Queen's Guards at nearby posts had noticed the commotion, but they could not leave their positions. They watched from the corners of their eyes, ready to help if needed, but still maintaining their ceremonial duties. They knew that Sergeant Mitchell could handle whatever was coming. Marcus clenched his fists tighter. The knuckles on his hands were white with tension. His whole body was shaking with anger and alcohol. He had reached the point where he was going to do something stupid and nothing could stop him. "You think you're so tough in that fancy costume?" Marcus yelled. "You're nothing. You're just a pretty boy playing dress-up." The words came out slurred and angry. His friends cringed at how loud and offensive he was being. A family with small children had been trying to take pictures of the guard, but they quickly moved away when they saw how aggressive Marcus was becoming. The father picked up his young daughter and carried her to safety. Other tourists were also leaving the area, sensing that something bad was about to happen. James Mitchell could feel the tension in the air. His military training had taught him to recognize when violence was about to occur. He could sense the drunk man's body language changing. The man was shifting his weight, getting ready to do something physical, but James remained calm and still. He had been in situations where enemy soldiers had tried to kill him with guns and bombs. A drunk tourist, no matter how big, was not going to make him panic or break his discipline. James was ready for whatever came next. Marcus took a step closer to the barrier. He was now close enough to reach over and touch the guard if he wanted to. The smell of alcohol and sweat came off him in waves. His breathing was heavy and fast, like an angry animal getting ready to attack. "Look at me," Marcus screamed at the top of his lungs. "I said, look at me, you coward." But James continued to stare straight ahead. His face showed no emotion at all. His military training had taught him that reacting to insults only made situations worse. This complete lack of response drove Marcus over the edge. In his drunk and angry mind, he decided that the only way to get the guard's attention was to hit him. Marcus had hit many people before, and it had always worked. People always paid attention to him after he hurt them. Marcus pulled his right arm back, making a fist. Several tourists saw what he was about to do and gasped. His friends shouted, "No!" But it was too late. Marcus had made his decision. With all his strength, Marcus threw a punch directly at Sergeant James Mitchell's face. His fist flew through the air, aimed at the guard's jaw. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The crowd of tourists held their breath. Marcus's friends watched in horror. The punch connected with James's jaw with a loud smacking sound. The force of the blow knocked James's tall ceremonial hat off his head. It fell to the ground and rolled a few feet away. For just a second, Marcus felt a surge of triumph. He had done it. He had hit a Queen's Guard in front of hundreds of people. But Marcus's feeling of victory lasted only a few seconds. He was about to learn the difference between hitting innocent victims and attacking a trained soldier. He was about to discover what real strength and real fighting skills looked like. Marcus had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he was about to pay a price that would change him forever. The moment Marcus's fist connected with his jaw, something changed in Sergeant James Mitchell. The ceremonial guard who had been standing perfectly still was gone. In his place stood a combat veteran who had been trained to fight and survive in the most dangerous places on Earth. James felt the punch hit his face. It hurt, but he had been hit much harder by enemy fighters in Afghanistan. The pain was nothing compared to what he had experienced in real combat. But this was not about the pain. This was about someone attacking a Queen's Guard, and that could not be allowed. For 12 years, James had followed the rules about staying still and ignoring insults. But those same rules gave him permission to defend himself when physically attacked. The moment Marcus threw that punch, he crossed a line that changed everything. Now James was not just a ceremonial guard. He was a soldier protecting his post. Marcus stood there for a split second, grinning stupidly. He thought he had won. He thought he had proven that the Queen's guards were weak and helpless. He had no idea what was about to happen to him. In his drunk mind, he believed the guard would just stand there and take more punishment. James moved faster than Marcus could believe possible. His military training took over completely. His body reacted without thinking, using skills that had been drilled into him through years of combat training. The ceremonial rifle in his hands was secured quickly as James prepared to defend himself. The first thing James did was step forward. Marcus was expecting the guard to step back or fall down. Instead, James moved toward him with the confidence of a man who had fought real enemies. Marcus's drunk brain could not process what was happening fast enough. James's first punch was an uppercut that came from below Marcus's vision. The blow caught Marcus completely by surprise. It hit him under the chin with tremendous force. Marcus's head snapped back violently. His mouth flew open and he made a choking sound. Marcus had thrown thousands of punches in his life, but he had never been hit by someone with professional fighting training. James's punch was precise and powerful. It was designed to end a fight quickly and efficiently. This was not a street fight between drunks. This was a soldier neutralizing a threat. Before Marcus could even react to the first punch, James threw a second one. This was a straight right hand that hit Marcus directly in the face. The sound of the impact echoed across the palace courtyard like a gunshot. Tourist phones captured every second of what was happening. Marcus felt his world explode. The second punch hit him so hard that he saw flashes of light behind his eyes. Pain shot through his skull like lightning. He could taste blood in his mouth immediately. His knees began to shake and he felt like he was going to fall down. But James was not finished. He had learned in combat that when you fight to win completely. You do not give your enemy a chance to recover and attack again. James threw a third punch. Another right hand that hit Marcus in the exact same spot as the second punch. This third punch was the one that did the most damage. Marcus felt his front teeth crack and break. He felt them come loose in his mouth. Blood began pouring from his lips and gums. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It was sharp and terrible and overwhelming. Marcus tried to fight back, but his body was not working properly anymore. The alcohol and the punches had made him dizzy and confused. He swung wildly at James, but his punch missed by several inches. James easily stepped back and avoided the clumsy attack. The crowd of tourists was screaming and shouting. Some people were calling for help. Others were running away from the violence. Children were crying, but most people were holding up their phones, recording everything that was happening. They could not believe what they were seeing. James could have thrown more punches, but he could see that Marcus was already defeated. The big man who had been so loud and aggressive just moments before was now stumbling and bleeding. James's training told him to stop fighting when the threat was neutralized. Marcus was swaying on his feet like a tree in a strong wind. Blood was running down his chin and dripping onto his black t-shirt. His eyes were unfocused and glassy. He was trying to say something, but only gurgling sounds came out of his damaged mouth. The whole fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. In that short time, a drunk bully had learned what it meant to attack someone who actually knew how to fight. Marcus had discovered the difference between intimidating innocent people and challenging a trained warrior. James stepped back and returned to his proper position. He straightened his uniform and picked up his ceremonial hat from the ground. He placed it back on his head with practiced movements. Within seconds, he looked like a perfect Queen's Guard again, as if nothing had happened. But Marcus was still standing there, bleeding and broken. He was no longer the confident bully who had walked up to the palace gates. He was just a hurt and confused man who had made a terrible mistake. His friends were standing nearby, too shocked to move or speak. Palace security was now running toward them. They had seen the whole incident and knew that the guard had acted in self-defense. Radio calls were going out for medical assistance and police backup. The situation was under control, but Marcus needed immediate medical attention. James remained at his post, calm and professional. His breathing was steady. His face showed no emotion. His hands were back in the proper position on his rifle. To anyone who had not seen the fight, James looked exactly like he had before Marcus had attacked him. Marcus, meanwhile, was discovering that actions have consequences. He was learning that the world does not work the way he thought it did. He was about to find out that attacking a Queen's Guard was not just stupid and painful, it was also illegal and would change his life forever. Marcus stood swaying in front of Sergeant James Mitchell, blood pouring from his mouth. His broken teeth felt loose and sharp against his tongue. The taste of blood was overwhelming, metallic and warm. He tried to spit, but more blood just filled his mouth immediately. The world around Marcus was spinning and blurry. The alcohol in his system mixed with the shock of being hit so hard made everything seem unreal. He could hear people screaming and shouting, but the sound seemed to come from far away. His vision was tunneling, getting darker around the edges. Marcus tried to focus on the guard who had just destroyed his face. James stood perfectly still again, looking straight ahead as if nothing had happened. His uniform was still perfect. His hat was back in place. Only his knuckles showed any sign of the violence that had just occurred. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt real fear. This was not like the fake fights he had won against drunk weaklings and old men. This was what it felt like to be completely outmatched by someone who actually knew how to fight. Marcus finally understood what his victims had felt when he bullied them. But Marcus was too drunk and too stupid to learn his lesson and walk away. Instead of apologizing or leaving, he decided to try again. In his damaged brain, he thought that one lucky punch could still save his reputation. He did not realize that he was about to make his situation much worse. Marcus wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. He tried to stand up straighter and look tough again, but his legs were shaky and his balance was off. The punches had rattled his brain more than he understood. He was like a boxer who had been knocked down but was too proud to stay down. "You got lucky," Marcus slurred through his broken teeth. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he spoke, spattering on the ground in front of him. "Let's see you do that again, pretty boy." His words were hard to understand because of his damaged mouth, but the threat was clear. James heard the words but did not react. He had dealt with many enemies who refused to quit even after being beaten. James knew that some people had to be stopped completely before they would give up. His military training had taught him to be ready for multiple attacks. Marcus clenched his fists again, even though his hands were shaking. He could barely see straight, but his pride would not let him admit defeat. In his mind, walking away now would make him look weak in front of all these people. He had to try to win, even though he had no chance. The crowd of tourists was watching in horrified fascination. They could not believe that this drunk man was going to attack the guard again after being beaten so badly. Parents covered their children's eyes. Some people were calling for police and medical help on their phones. Marcus's friends were yelling at him to stop. "Marcus, no!" Tony shouted. "You're hurt. Let's go." But Marcus could not hear them anymore. The combination of alcohol, pain, and humiliation had made him completely irrational. He was going to fight until he could not fight anymore. James saw Marcus getting ready to attack again. The drunk man's body language was obvious, even though he was badly hurt. James shifted his weight slightly, preparing for what he knew was coming. He would defend himself again, as many times as necessary. Marcus threw another wild punch at James's face. But this time, Marcus was much slower and weaker. The first beating had taken away most of his strength and coordination. His punch was clumsy and easy to see coming. James had plenty of time to react. James blocked Marcus's punch with his left arm, then immediately countered with his own right hand. This punch was different from the first three. James put all of his strength behind it, aiming directly at Marcus's jaw. He wanted to end this fight permanently. The punch hit Marcus with devastating force. It sounded like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. Marcus's head snapped to the side so violently that several people in the crowd thought his neck might be broken. Spit and blood flew through the air in a wide arc. Marcus's eyes rolled back in his head. His knees buckled immediately. He tried to say something, but no words came out. His brain had been rattled so hard that it simply shut down to protect itself from further damage. Marcus was unconscious before he started falling. The big man who had terrorized his neighborhood for years collapsed like a building that had been demolished. He fell straight backward, his arms at his sides, completely limp. His head hit the concrete ground with a sickening thud that made several tourists gasp and turn away. Marcus lay on the ground motionless. His eyes were closed and blood was pooling under his head from his broken mouth. His face was already swelling up like a balloon. His breathing was shallow and irregular. He looked nothing like the tough guy who had walked up to the palace gates just minutes before. The crowd fell silent for a moment, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Then the screaming started again, louder than before. People were calling for ambulances and police. Some tourists were crying. Others were still recording everything with their phones. James looked down at Marcus's unconscious body, then immediately returned to his ceremonial position. He had done what he needed to do to defend himself and his post. Now it was time for others to handle the situation. Palace security and medical personnel would take care of the rest. Marcus's friends stood frozen, staring at their leader lying motionless on the ground. They had never seen Marcus lose a fight, let alone get knocked unconscious. They did not know what to do or say. Their tough friend who had always protected them was now helpless and broken. Tony knelt down next to Marcus and tried to wake him up. Marcus, can you hear me?" But Marcus did not respond. His face was purple and swollen. Blood continued to flow from his mouth. Tony had never seen anyone hurt this badly before. Palace security officers arrived and immediately took control of the scene. They knew that Sergeant Mitchell had acted properly in defending himself. They also knew that Marcus needed immediate medical attention. Ambulances were already on their way. As Marcus lay unconscious on the cold concrete, his life was already changing in ways he could not imagine. The video of his humiliating defeat was already being uploaded to social media by dozens of tourists. Soon, millions of people around the world would see the neighborhood bully get exactly what he deserved. The sound of sirens filled the air around Buckingham Palace. Within minutes of Marcus hitting the ground, 3 ambulances and 4 police cars had arrived at the scene. Palace security had called for help immediately after seeing Marcus collapse and stop moving. Paramedics rushed to where Marcus lay unconscious on the concrete. They checked his pulse and breathing while shining lights in his eyes. One paramedic spoke into his radio. "We have an unconscious male, approximately 30 years old, with severe facial trauma and possible head injury. Patient is breathing but unresponsive." The lead paramedic, a woman named Sarah, had seen many fight victims before, but she was shocked by the damage to Marcus's face. His jaw was clearly broken. Several teeth were missing completely and others were hanging loose. His face was swollen beyond recognition. "What happened here?" Sarah asked one of the palace security officers. The officer explained that Marcus had attacked a Queen's guard and been knocked unconscious in self-defense. Sarah nodded and continued working on Marcus. She had no sympathy for people who attacked others, but she would still do her job professionally. The paramedics carefully lifted Marcus onto a stretcher. His head rolled to one side and more blood poured from his mouth. They put a neck brace on him in case his spine had been injured when he fell. His breathing was weak and irregular, which worried the medical team. As the ambulance drove away with Marcus inside, police officers began interviewing witnesses. There were dozens of tourists who had seen everything that happened. All of them told the same story. Marcus had been drunk and aggressive, insulting the guard and eventually attacking him. Detective Inspector Collins was the senior police officer at the scene. He had been a cop for 20 years and had seen many fights, but this case was unusual because it involved a Queen's guard. He needed to make sure everything was handled properly. The guard acted completely within his rights, Collins told his partner. He was attacked and defended himself. The drunk idiot brought this on himself. Collins had no patience for people who caused trouble at royal palaces. These were places that thousands of tourists visited every day to see something beautiful and historic. Sergeant James Mitchell was asked to give a statement about what had happened. He spoke calmly and professionally, describing the events exactly as they had occurred. James showed no emotion as he talked about knocking Marcus unconscious. For him, it had just been another day at work. The subject became increasingly aggressive and intoxicated, James told the detective. He made threats and then struck me in the face. I defended myself using appropriate force to neutralize the threat. I stopped as soon as the subject was no longer able to continue his attack. Detective Collins was impressed by James's professionalism. Many people would have been shaken up after such a violent encounter, but James was calm and clear in his description of events. This was obviously a man who had been in dangerous situations before. Marcus's 3 friends were also questioned by police. Tony, Dave, and Pete were all scared and confused. They had never been involved in anything this serious before. They tried to explain that Marcus had been drinking and that they had tried to stop him, but they knew their friend was in serious trouble. "We told him to leave the guard alone," Tony said to the police officer. "We tried to pull him away, but Marcus is stronger than us. He wouldn't listen. We never thought he would actually hit the guy." Tony was crying as he spoke. He knew that Marcus had ruined his own life with his stupidity. The police officer taking Tony's statement was not sympathetic. "Your friend attacked a member of the Queen's Guard," he said sternly. "This is a very serious crime. He will be facing criminal charges when he wakes up." Tony realized that their fun day trip to London had turned into a nightmare. Meanwhile, at the hospital, doctors were working to save Marcus's life. The head injury from hitting the concrete was more serious than the facial damage. Marcus had a severe concussion and some bleeding in his brain. The doctors were not sure if he would wake up or if he would have permanent brain damage. Dr. Amanda Chen was the emergency room physician treating Marcus. She had been a doctor for 15 years and had treated many assault victims, but the damage to Marcus's face was among the worst she had ever seen from a fistfight. "He's going to need multiple surgeries," Dr. Chen told her colleague. "The jaw is broken in 3 places. He's lost 4 teeth completely, and several others will need to be removed. The facial reconstruction alone will take months." She shook her head at the extent of the injuries. Back at Buckingham Palace, the crowd of tourists was slowly returning to normal. Palace security had cleaned up the blood from the concrete and reopened the area. But many people were still talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. Sergeant James Mitchell had returned to his ceremonial duties, as if nothing had happened. He stood perfectly still at his post, looking straight ahead. His uniform had been cleaned and pressed. His hat sat at the perfect angle. To new tourists arriving at the palace, James looked like any other Queen's Guard. But James's knuckles were swollen and sore from the punches he had thrown. He would probably have bruises for several days. His jaw also hurt where Marcus had hit him, though the damage was minor compared to what Marcus had suffered. The incident was already spreading across social media. Tourists had uploaded videos of the fight to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. The videos showed Marcus attacking the guard and then being knocked unconscious with devastating punches. Within hours, millions of people around the world were watching Marcus's humiliation. The headlines in newspapers and online news sites were brutal. Drunk tourist attacks, Queen's Guard, gets knocked out cold and bully picks fight with wrong person, ends up in hospital. The story was becoming international news, and Marcus was becoming famous for all the wrong reasons. Sarah, Marcus's girlfriend back in Manchester, saw the news on television while she was at work. She watched in horror as the video showed her boyfriend being knocked unconscious by the guard. She knew immediately that their relationship was over. She could not be with someone who would embarrass himself and her like this on international television. Marcus's boss at the construction company also saw the news. He called an emergency meeting with his managers to discuss what to do about Marcus. "We cannot have someone who attacks Queen's Guards working for our company," he said. "This reflects badly on all of us. He's fired as soon as he gets out of the hospital." As Marcus lay unconscious in his hospital bed, his entire life was falling apart. He had no idea that he was about to lose his job, his girlfriend, and his reputation. The man who had thought he was the toughest guy in Manchester was about to discover that being a bully had consequences he never imagined. Marcus woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed, feeling like his head had been hit by a truck. The room was white and sterile, filled with the sounds of beeping machines and voices in the hallway. For a few seconds, Marcus did not remember where he was or what had happened to him. Then the pain hit him like a wave. His jaw felt like it was on fire. His entire face was swollen and throbbing. When he tried to open his mouth, sharp pain shot through his skull. He tried to speak, but only mumbling sounds came out through his wired-shut jaw. A nurse came into the room and saw that Marcus was awake. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said in a professional voice. "You're in St. Mary's Hospital in London. You've been unconscious for 2 days. The doctor will be in shortly to explain your injuries." Marcus tried to ask what had happened, but he could not speak clearly. The nurse understood what he was trying to say. "You were in a fight at Buckingham Palace," she said. "You have serious injuries to your face and head. You're lucky to be alive." Dr. Chen came in a few minutes later with Marcus's medical chart. She looked tired and serious as she sat down next to his bed. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Chen. I've been treating you since you arrived. I need to explain the extent of your injuries." Marcus listened in growing horror as the doctor described what had happened to him. His jaw was broken in 3 places and would need to be wired shut for at least 6 weeks. He had lost 4 teeth completely, and 3 others would need to be removed and replaced with implants. The reconstruction surgery would cost thousands of pounds. You also have a severe concussion, Dr. Chen continued. There was some bleeding in your brain, but we've managed to control it. You may experience headaches, dizziness, and memory problems for several months. Some of these effects could be permanent. As the doctor spoke, Marcus began to remember what had happened at the palace. He remembered drinking beer on the train. He remembered yelling at the guard. He remembered throwing a punch. After that, everything was blank until waking up in this hospital bed. A police officer came to see Marcus that afternoon. Detective Inspector Collins sat down next to the bed and opened his notebook. "Mr. Thompson, you're under arrest for assault on a crown servant," he said formally. "You have the right to remain silent, but anything you do say may be used as evidence against you." Marcus tried to protest, but his wired jaw made it impossible to speak clearly. The detective continued reading him his rights and explaining the charges. Assaulting a Queen's Guard was a serious crime that could result in up to 5 years in prison. Marcus would have to appear in court as soon as he was released from the hospital. The entire incident was recorded by dozens of witnesses. Detective Collins told Marcus, "We have clear video evidence of you attacking the guard unprovoked. Your friends have already given statements confirming that you were drunk and aggressive. You don't have much of a defense here." That evening, Marcus's friends Tony, Dave, and Pete came to visit him in the hospital. They looked uncomfortable and embarrassed as they stood around his bed. They had spent 2 days dealing with police interviews and media attention, and they were not happy with Marcus. "The whole thing is all over the internet," Tony told Marcus. "Millions of people have seen the video of you getting knocked out. It's on every news website and social media platform. Everyone is calling you an idiot." Tony's voice was angry and disappointed. Marcus tried to ask about his job and his girlfriend, but his friends just shook their heads sadly. "Sarah broke up with you," Dave said quietly. "She saw the news and said she never wants to see you again. And your boss called. You're fired. The company doesn't want to be associated with someone who attacks royal guards." The reality of his situation began to sink in for Marcus. In just a few seconds of drunken stupidity, he had destroyed his entire life. He had lost his girlfriend, his job, and his reputation. He was facing criminal charges and thousands of pounds in medical bills, all because he had thought he could bully a Queen's Guard. Over the next few weeks, as Marcus slowly recovered in the hospital, the story continued to spread around the world. The video of his knockout had been viewed millions of times. News shows were using it as an example of what happens when tourists behave badly. Marcus had become an international symbol of stupidity and arrogance. Marcus received hundreds of messages on social media, but none of them were supportive. People from around the world were calling him names and making jokes about his injuries. His face had become a meme that people shared to make fun of bullies who picked fights with the wrong people. The worst part for Marcus was reading the comments from people in his own neighborhood in Manchester. People he had bullied for years were celebrating his humiliation. "Finally got what he deserved," wrote one person. "Karma caught up with the neighborhood bully," wrote another. Marcus realized that nobody felt sorry for him. When Marcus was finally released from the hospital after 3 weeks, he returned to Manchester to find that his entire life had changed. His landlord had evicted him for not paying rent while he was in the hospital. His belongings were in storage and he had nowhere to live. Without a job, Marcus could not afford his apartment or his medical bills. The facial reconstruction surgery would cost more than £15,000. His car was repossessed because he could not make the payments. Marcus had to move in with his elderly mother, who was ashamed and disappointed in her son. The court case was a disaster for Marcus. The judge had no sympathy for someone who had attacked a Queen's Guard while drunk. The video evidence was overwhelming, and Marcus's defense lawyer could only ask for mercy. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay a fine of £5,000. In prison, Marcus had plenty of time to think about what he had done. The other inmates had all seen the video of his knockout and they made fun of him constantly. The tough guy who had once terrorized his neighborhood was now just another prisoner being bullied by others. Meanwhile, Sergeant James Mitchell continued his duties as a Queen's Guard with honor and distinction. He received commendations from his superiors for his professionalism during the incident. The video of him defending himself had made him famous around the world as an example of military discipline and training. When Marcus was finally released from prison, He was a different man. The injuries to his face had healed, but he still had trouble eating and speaking clearly. More importantly, his confidence and arrogance were completely gone. He had learned the hardest possible lesson about what happens when bullies meet people who are truly strong. Marcus found work doing manual labor for minimum wage. Nobody wanted to hire the man who had become famous for being knocked out by a Queen's Guard. He lived quietly with his mother, trying to rebuild his life and stay out of trouble. The neighborhood that Marcus had once terrorized with his bullying was now peaceful. Children could play outside without fear. Old people could walk to the shops without being intimidated. The local pub was a friendlier place without Marcus's angry presence every night. Marcus's story became a cautionary tale that parents told their children about the importance of treating others with respect. It was proof that no matter how big or tough you think you are, there is always someone stronger, and it was a reminder that actions have consequences, sometimes more serious than you could ever imagine. The Queen's Guards continued their duties at Buckingham Palace, protecting the royal family and serving as symbols of British tradition and strength. They stood perfectly still and dignified, just as they had for centuries. And tourists from around the world continued to visit and take pictures, treating the guards with the respect they deserved. As for Marcus Thompson, he learned that real strength comes not from hurting others, but from controlling yourself and treating people with kindness. It was a lesson that cost him everything he had, but it was the most important lesson of his life.